Let's begin from the beginning. We're at the beginning then of the Shulchan Aruch Siman Tafresh Bet in the Orach Chaim, and we will be looking at the Shulchan Aruch and the comments of the Mishnah Berurah, and here and there some of the comments in the Shahat Tzion. So just to refresh ourselves from last week, a couple of things. One of them is that we're looking now at halachot, some of which we have already covered in the Gemara, and some of which we haven't. And I debated about this, but because we're still going to go through some of these sugyot in the Gemara that deal directly with what we're going to do. But I decided that it's okay. We'll take a little break from Gemara and look at halacha l'maaseh. And one of the purposes of doing what I'm doing now is to both introduce learning the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan. And so you can see the different styles of these two halachic works. They have very different halachic styles, even though they were published at around the same time. The only other thing I'll mention at this time is the Mishnah Berurah was written specifically just on the Orach Chaim section of the Shulchan Aruch. Right, so the Shulchan Aruch has 4 sections. These are based on the 4 sections that were established by the Tur, and thus the name of his work is the Arba Turim. The Arba Turim, the four lines, as it were, right, which is a reference to the Turim of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, which was divided into 4 rows with 3 stones each, and each stone represented the Bnei Yisrael. So, in any event, I'll just say something about that now, because I don't know if I don't think I talked about it last week, and I'm not sure if I've talked about it before, but we all know this, or at least we know some of this. The Tur was designed to organize halakha that's relevant since the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So unlike the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, which is a compendium of all of the halachot that we find in that are based on the Torah and on the Gemara, the Mishnah, and so forth. And the Rambam created his own organization, which was quite a radical thought at the time. It was a very big radical move at the time, for which the Rambam actually got a lot of criticism. But the reality is that most in yeshivas, generally speaking, the emphasis was not put on all of Shas. The Meiri also speaks about this, that there are certain masechtas that were not regularly learned because they weren't halacha l'maaseh. So most of, let's say, Seder Kodashim wasn't learned except for Kulin. Kulin is where we get a lot of the halachot of kashrut, shvita, and so forth. But let's say not Zvachim and Menachot and all the rest of it were not learned regularly. When you get to the Tur, so the Tur organizes all of the halachot that people needed to know for life in a post Beit HaMikdash world. So he divided into 4 sections, and they are the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim includes essentially all time-bound mitzvot. It's all of the time-bound mitzvot, and beginning from when you get up in the morning till when you go to bed at night. So it includes all of the davening and tzitzit and tefillin, and then all of the holidays, beginning with Shabbat and then Rosh Chodesh, and so forth. So, of course, it also includes Yom Kippurim. The other sections are Yored De'ah, which essentially includes all of the Bein Adam L'Makom mitzvot that are not time-bound. And then you have the Even HaEzer, which is the halachot that have to do with relations between men and women, meaning marriage, divorce, and so forth, related topics. And the last one is the Choshen Mishpat. And the Choshen Mishpat is what we think of as generally as civil law. So that's also includes court procedure, tort law, and so forth. Now, the Mishnah Brura was mainly focused, or he was only focused actually on the Orach Chaim. He wanted everyday people to know what practical halacha was for the halachot that affect them most, right? The Orach Chaim is what we turn to in principle on a day-to-day basis. So it's the most widely used, let's say, most widely referenced set of halachot. And he designed the Mishnah Brura to be accessible to the Baal Bayit as he understood the Baal Bayit. I read an interesting story about this, which I'll tell you in a moment. But that was his focus, and that's where he begins and that's where he ends. He didn't write a Mishnah Brura on the rest of the Shulchan Aruch. I'll just give you a quick version of the story, and pardon me if I've told you the story before, but there is a story with this fellow who he was from Rodin, where the Chafetz Chaim lived. Hold on just one second. But he ended up living in New York. He was an elderly man when he had a son. He had a grown son who was in a very serious car accident and was critically injured. And because of his age, and I can't remember in the story if it was his only son, I don't think it matters, but somebody who knew him, who knew both the son and the father, somehow he was apprised of the situation with the son, and he said, listen, I'll go tell him, because you have to be delicate with him. He's very old, and we don't want to put him into shock lest he have a heart attack or something. So he went to this elderly man's house, and he didn't tell him right away that the son was critically injured. He said to him, your son was in an accident. He's at the hospital, and I think we should go see him. So the man said, fine, and he got on his coat, and they started driving to the hospital. And along the way, this man is trying to introduce the idea that his son was critically injured, and that it's very serious, he may not survive. And he does this like in steps and stages, and at each stage that he tries to explain the severity of the situation, the old man seems completely calm and not worried at all. And so the guy who's taking him thinks that maybe maybe he's already got a little bit of dementia, maybe he doesn't really understand what's going on. But he says, look, he says to himself, I'm just going to leave it to the doctor to tell him finally like what the situation is. So they get to the hospital and they go to see the doctor, and the son is, I think he's in the operating room, something like that. And the doctor tells him, you know, your son is critically injured and we don't think he's going to survive the night. And the man is still completely calm, without a worry in the world. And you know, they say to him, don't you understand, you know, your son might die? And he said, says, what do you doctors know that the Chafetz Chaim didn't know? And they look at him like, what do you mean? So he said, you don't understand. He said, when I was in Rodden, I was a balabait in Rodden. I was a balabas in Rodden. I was a friend of the Chafetz Chaim. And when he was writing the Mishnah Brura, he wanted to make sure that it was accessible to just a stam balabais. You know, there's not a yeshiva person necessarily, but somebody who has some, like, a little bit of background. So as a favor to him, I would read through the manuscript as he was writing it, and, you know, to make sure that I understood everything and make comments and whatever. And the Chafetz Chaim was very grateful, and he said to me, he gave me a blessing. He said that you'll never live to see any of your children die. So, and then he just walked out. You know, he said, you know, don't worry, everything's gonna be fine. So of course you can guess the end of the story is that the son made it through the night when they thought he was going to die, and he makes a complete recovery. So from the story we learned a number of things, but one of them was that we see from the story that this was exactly the intention of the Mishnah Brura. He also talks about this idea, how, you know, that he wants to make halacha accessible in the introduction, which we didn't do. It's very interesting. Anybody, if you have the time and the inclination, you could read the introduction. What we did do last week is we looked at the Sha'ar, and we just read through the frontispiece of the book, which just gives a concise summary of what each of the parts are. So just so we're clear, so in the standard Mishnah Brura, we have as the main text at the top in block letters is the Shulchan Aruch, and then integrated into the main text in Rashi script are the comments of the Ramah, Ramesh Isulis, and those are called respectively the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramesh Isulis called his comments the Mapa. It's the set table and the tablecloth, as it were, and then below that we have several parts. Three of them that were not part of the Mishnah Brura, but that he took from previous editions of the Shulchan Aruch, are the Be'er Heitev, which is kind of a forerunner to the Mishnah Brura. It's a summary of some of the Achronim that had already written on the Shulchan Aruch, and next to it is the Sha'arei Tshuva, which is a listing of many relevant Shelot Tshuvot for each part, for each halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. Not for every halacha, but for pretty much every siman, every chapter. And then below that we have the Mishnah Brura, which is the main explanation of the Shulchan Aruch. It's both an explanation and halachic work unto itself, where the Mishnah Brura will either sometimes disagree with the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, and or add on specific halachot that are not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. We have next to this the Beur Halacha, which was also written by the Chafetz Chaim, and that's an expansion on specific points of Halacha. And then at the bottom we have the Shar HaTzion, which are the references that to halachot that he cites in the Mishnah Berurah. So last week, I'm not going to bring it up this week, but you've seen a Mishnah Berurah. That's the basic layout. Last week I brought up an image, but for now, let's just dive into the halacha. When we start the Aruch HaShulchan, I'll give you more of an introduction to the Aruch HaShulchan. So this is what we have to say. So this siman, Yisor Achila B'Yom HaKippurim v'Shiur Kamota, Shiur Kamuta Ubo Asara Seifim. Right. So this is about the Isur of eating on Yom Kippur. So Seif Aleph, Ha'ochel B'Yom HaKippurim Kikotevet HaKasa Chayav. והוא פחות מקבצה מעט, בשיעור זה שווה לכל אדם בין לננס ובין לעוד מלך הבשן. So if you eat on Yom Kippur the size of a fat date, you're chayav, right? So now in this, he'll mention this in a moment, but so chayav, of course, we know what that means in context is that if you eat b'mezid on Yom Kippur, you're chayav karet. We'll talk. He's going to talk about the relevance of knowing when things are a chiyuv d'oraita or a chiyuv d'rabanan and so forth. That and this shiur is a little bit less than a kibetza. Upachot mikibetza ma'at. The shiur zeh shaveh l'chol adam ben l'nanas ben l'od melech habashan. Right. So everything that we see in this halacha are things that we saw. Either the Gemara says or explicated by the Rishonim. So this shiur is the same shiur whether you're a dwarf or whether you're as big as Og, the king of Bashan, who is a giant. So what does the Mishnah Berurah say about this? Let's see. So I think we looked at this last time, but we'll just start again. Right, so even though all other shiurim of the Torah, all other isurim of the Torah, we measure by kazayit, that's in all places where the isur is written in the language of achila, of eating. Masha'en can be Yom Kippurim, lo k'tiv achila, right? Something that we've mentioned many, many times. The Torah doesn't forbid us from eating by using the language of achila. Right? The Torah restrains us from eating using the language of inui, of affliction. And he brings just this one, right? We know that there are 5 or 6, depending on how you count, psukim that deal with inui and Yom Kippur. The kimlahu l'chachamim de betachot mikikotavet lo niyat v'da'atei. It was established to the chachamim, and the chachamim had a tradition that less than a kikotevet would not be miyashev dat, would not put one's mind at ease klal at all. V'harehu ra'ev mu'uneh kivat chila, and here he would still be hungry and afflicted as in the beginning. In other words, as he was even before he ate, if he ate less than a kikotevet hagasa. And he ends off by saying the ayin Beur Halacha, and we looked at the Beur Halacha last week, and there he talks about exactly what this shiur of the Kotevet HaKasa, does it include the garin or does it not include the garin? So we're going to leave that for now. and v'hu pachot mikabetza. It's less than a kabetza. It's a novamar betza benonit. What he means here is an average-sized egg. So this is based on other discussions which we're not going to get into. They're not in the Gemara and Yoma. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Negayim that talks about this. But that's what it's based on. And what he means, of course, is the average chicken egg. Right? Those are the eggs that we're using. So the Dagum Mervava is one of the Achronim who wrote glosses onto the Shulchan Aruch. Oh, there is one thing though I wanted to show you. Well, I'll finish this and I'll show you. And he holds that the kabetza that's being spoken about is without, it's the betza without the shell. So that would mean it's a smaller kabetza if you take away the shell. Right? And there's another achron, Binyan Sion, who disagrees with him. Right, so I just remembered this. I did just have to remember where I put it. Just a second. I also want, last week I showed you the image of the Mishnah Brura. I wanted to show you, in case you're not familiar, just for your own reference. I want to show you what a standard Shulchan Aruch looks like. I think it's in here. Yeah. This came to be a standard Shulchan Aruch. This is from the 19th century. And, these are like the really big volumes. They're even taller than a standard Shas because they have so many things on each page. And this edition was called Sefer Beginei Eretz. And here it lists on the first page all of the Perushim. Actually, this isn't all, because this is the third volume. The Orach Chaim itself in this edition has 3 volumes. 1 second. But I'll just show you for a second the Shulchan Aruch, what it looks like on what we're learning right now. So this is Hilchot Yom Kippurim. This is Siman Tafresh Daled. We're a little bit further on, but it doesn't matter. So the inside of the page, in other words, the part of the page that's next to the binding, where in a standard Gemara you'll find Rashi, in the Orach Chaim of the Shulchan Aruch you'll find the Taz, the Turei Zahav. And on the other side, where you would find Tosfos in a Gemara, you have the Magen Avraham. Up here in the corner, you have the Be'er HaGolah, which is also printed in the standard Mishnah Brura, and that's the references to. Those are references of the Shulchan Aruch, right? Because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring his sources. The Yosef Karo depended on the Beis Yosef, where he lists all his sources in great detail and with discussion. But when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't list any of his sources. So those are listed in the Be'er HaGolah. And then we have any number of other commentators on the side, the Netiv Chaim, the Vushay Srad. The Vushay Srad is mainly a commentary. It's actually a super commentary on the Magen Avraham. Down here we have Be'orei HaGra, the Ateretz Kenim, and there are more. There are more depending on, you'll see more depending on the particular page that you're on. Here we have on the next page, we have the Chiddushei Rabbi Akiva Eger, and here we have the Ateretz Kenim again, and so forth. And on top of that, in the back of the book, there are even more. So the main there are a couple of other super commentaries on the Taz and the Magen Avraham. The most prominent, I guess I would say, is called the Pri Megadim, and he wrote a super commentary on both the Taz and the Magen Avraham. Each one is separate, and on the Taz, he called it the Mishpet Zahav. On the Magen Avraham, he called it the Eshel Avraham, and so forth. And there's other ones. There's the Pri Chadash. So what the Mishnah Berurah was confronting was this reality that even if you owned a full set of Shulchan Aruch with all of these commentaries, it's an enormous effort to go through and sift through them all to understand what halakha should be, right? Because we're going to have many disagreements among these achronim about what halakha is. And this was one of the main motivations for the Mishnah Berurah to write the Mishnah Berurah in a way that it parallels what the Beis Yosef did when he wrote the Beis Yosef, right? Because he wrote it as around the tour, but in his introduction, he also introduces the idea, but that by his time, there were dozens of halachic works. And at that time, they were mostly just scattered around in different manuscripts. It was only in his lifetime that things started to get printed. And so to make it easier for everybody, he pulls them all together into the Beis Yosef and then ultimately into the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, anyway. Let's go back to the Mishnah Berurah. Now, we all want to know. Now, so in other words, here's the thing. So he tells us, the Shulchan Aruch tells us that we're not allowed to eat kekotevet agasa, and that's a little bit less than a kibetza. So we, in our day and age, we're used to measurements that are measured in ounces or in milliliters and so forth. We have different measures. But even though this was only written a little over 100 years ago, right? This is, Mishnah Berurah was written in the beginning, in the late 19th, early 20th century. But, these kinds of standard measurements were not so standard at the time. So people need to know what these measurements are and how we get to them. So he's already mentioned a little bit previously, but now he's going to talk a little bit more. Shiur zeh shaveh, right? So this shiur is equal for all people, whether it's a big person or a little person. Chachamim held that this shiur, I fear I'm losing Michael and Paul.
I'm sorry. I am. I'm here.
No, I know.
I'm sorry.
No. Look, I'm always a little bit worried because this is a bit of a lecture, and I would like to get a little bit more involvement, but I didn't set it up that way.
No, you didn't. No, I mean, this material has to be given over, and there's probably no other way to do it.
Well, the other way of doing this is to assign this to everybody to prepare beforehand, and then we can discuss it. But as you know, I don't usually give you homework, but we can talk about that. If you're interested, let's say for next week, I could send you, you can access these online in digital form on Al HaTorah or on Sfaria. They have this. The Al HaTorah version of the Mishnah Berurah has the Mishnah Berurah and the Shar HaTzion. The Sfaria version doesn't have the Shar HaTzion, but as we'll see, the Shar HaTzion is not critical for understanding. It's really for finding. It's his footnotes for sources. The Aruch HaShulchan.
Now, one thing that would be useful, I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that'd be useful, I don't know if this is available, is there just online a map of a page? Just okay, it's this commentary that just that makes it easy to remember. Okay, the inside is this, how so on and so forth.
Right. I don't think they have it for the Mishnah Berurah. That's or the Shulchan Aruch. That's why I gave you the a little tour. You can, but you can download a PDF of the Mishnah Berurah. Just 1 second. I have to remember where I put that. I think I put it here. Let me just see. 1 second. That's weird. All right, I don't now. I had this, Michael will attest. I had it last week.
I'll just watch the video from last week.
Yeah, well, look at the video from last week, and the other thing I do want to say is, if you have the inclination, the Mishnah Berurah that I showed you is a facsimile of the original print, which is actually what I have at home. It's an offset reproduction of the original. But since then, there's been, I think, at least 2 printings of the Mishnah Berurah with the same layout, but they have been retypeset with computer typesetting, so they're much easier to read. There's still, block script and Rashi script, right? So the Mishnah Berurah itself is still going to be in Rashi script, but the printing is much clearer. And also, I know at least in one of the editions, they put Nikud in the Shulchan Aruch part, in the main text, they have Nikud. So that makes it much easier to access. So, that's what I have to say about that. Hold on a second. This is here. But the point that, the only other thing I'll tell you is, when you look at a Mishnah Berurah, it will tell you on the right. So at the top of the page, I'm sorry, wait 1 second. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, I don't remember where I put it now. I have like my own little. On the page itself, it'll tell you what the different commentaries are. It doesn't tell you the Shulchan Aruch is the Shulchan Aruch, but that's evident. But in the top, like you saw on the page of the Shulchan Aruch that I showed you, on the top right, it'll tell you it's the Be'er HaGolah. Below the Shulchan Aruch in the Mishnah Berurah editions, it'll tell you that one side is the Sharei Tshuva, and this part is the Be'er Etev, and then below it will say Mishnah Berurah and Be'ur Halacha, wherever there's a Be'ur Halacha, and the Shar Tzion at the bottom. So all of that will be evident. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. But if you want, I would encourage everybody to I don't know, Michael and Paul, or all of you, if you want, maybe want to set up a chavrusa, and you could start to work on the Aruch HaShulchan yourself. A lot of the language is language that you'll know because we did the Gemaras for much of it, not all of it, but for much of it. And if you get stuck on a word, or the things you'll get stuck on are particular words and particular Rashi Tevot, right? Particular acronyms. I can give you, if anyone is interested, at home I have as an addition, I have a Otsar Roshei Tevot, which is quite handy, and you can download it as a PDF. It's the most complete Roshei Tevot book that I know of, and it encompasses, it's helpful for halachic literature. I think it also works to some degree for modern Hebrew, but modern Hebrew has its own set of Roshei Tevot, most of which you can find. The other, I'm throwing out references here. If you're familiar with Wiki Milon, right, just like you have Wiktionary in English, there's Wiki Milon. So Wiki Milon also is a very good reference for Roshei Tevot. Just in general, and I think it's the single most comprehensive place for Roshei Tevot because it includes all the modern ones, all the modern Hebrew ones, and quite a few of the ones that you'll encounter in halachic literature. Once you get used, and also actually if you have an actual Mishnah Brura, in the very beginning, on one of the early pages, he has a list of Roshei Tevot that he uses. I don't know that it's comprehensive, but it's fairly comprehensive. When you start learning halachic literature, you get used to this idea of Roshei Tevot. So in some cases, it's more extreme than others. But in the Mishnah Brura, I would say it's a sort of a low level. But nonetheless, you'll encounter Roshei Tevot that you're not familiar with. So those are all references to be used. So let's move on a little bit. The shiur zeh shaveh, all right, so this is for this shiur of Kebetzach, of Kikotevet Hagasah, rather. This is the same shiur for both big people and little people. All right, Tekim lehu l'chachamim de b'shiur zeh miyat v'date. With this shiur, his mind is put at ease, right? So we know that this language of miyat v'date, that's from the Gemara, even though we didn't actually look at that Gemara yet, but we've referenced it many times. Right, this is miyat v'date de kol adam, ma'ato harbe, right? Ubebatzir mizeh, and less than this, lo miyat v'date de shum enash. Less than this, it will not put the mind at ease of anyone. In other words, even if you're a small person and relative to your size, less than a Kekotevet Hagasah would be, huge, let's say, compared to if you're a very big person. But this is just the Masorah of the Chachamim, that this is a specific amount of food that is miyashev da'at of anyone. But less than this, it's not miyashev da'at of anyone. Right, so this which the mechaber, who's the mechaber? You know this term?
It's the Shulchan Aruch, the Yosef Karo.
Right, so the Shulchan Aruch is referred to as the author, the mechaber. So I'll just point out, we've seen, let's say, when we looked at, we didn't look at this recently, I think, but when you learn the nosek, another term for the commentaries or the things that are written around the Shulchan Aruch, they're also called the nosei kelim. I think I mentioned this last time, right? And a nosei kelim is a biblical type of term. It means the squire, right? The people who carry the vessels, who carry like the kelim of their master, and they're not always commentaries as such, right? Sometimes they're commenting not to explain because the explanation might be clear, but sometimes they're commenting to disagree or to expand on what the comments are saying. Similarly, you have the Nosei Kelim on the Rambam, who generally are not explaining the Rambam. I shouldn't put it that way. Their main purpose was not to explain the Rambam, but mainly to bring the sources for the Rambam. Those are all called Nosei Kelim. So the Nosei Kelim generally refer to whatever the reference book that they're writing around. They'll refer to that person often as Rabbeinu, right? So the Beit Yosef, when he's talking about the tour, he calls him Rabbeinu, our master. And here it became common for the Nosei Kelim of the Shulchan Aruch to call him the Mechaber. Those are just the way it worked out. So that which the Mechaber has
I was
taught.
going to say a quick lexical question.
Yeah.
Is there the same wordplay between author and authority with the term mechaber? So in English, we have the wordplay. We have author and authority.
Okay.
Is there something similar with the term mechaber or
I
no?
don't think so. It's an interesting question. I don't think so. Right. It has a similar implication, but not really in the same way. But by referencing him as Hamichaber, right, with Hey Hayudiyah, with the definite article, implies the authority, but not in a linguistic sense, the way you're saying with author and authority. Right, so this which the Mechaber has taught us, right, or is read here in the sense of being posek halacha, right? Here where he has paskened this shiur le'inyan chiyuv. That is, he's giving us the shiur that you would need to eat in order to be chayav. After isurohu afilu b'kol shehu, even though the isur applies even to the smallest amount, kidulakaman sifhei ayin sham, as we will see later on in sifhei. Look there, mishum de nun mem. Do you know what nun mem stands for?
No.
No. Okay. So nun mem is short for nafka mina, right? Which is such a common term. It's usually, it's very often just brought as Roshei Tevot, and it has even entered modern Hebrew, even though I think most Israelis don't know that it's Aramaic and what it means exactly, but what it means in context, nafka mina literally means yotzei mizeh. It comes out of this, it goes out of this. And what it means is this is the practical difference. That's what nafka mina means practically. Right? So
Is there a practical difference or practical implication?
It depends on the context. It'll depend on the context. But here I can phrase it in this way, that what's the practical difference between mentioning chiyuv or not mentioning chiyuv? Why does it matter to say that something is chayav or not chayav when it's all asur? That's the question that he's answering. He says, "Denafka minamizeh liinyan haniskar b'siman tafresh yud chet." So that's tafresh yud chet. Siman tafresh yud chet is a few simanim later. We're in tafresh yud bet. So in a few simanim, he says it's going to be practical for what he discusses later on in siman tafresh yud chet, odot choleh, regarding a sick person, because we feed a sick person less than a kashiur. The alkain, I am kaf, alkain, tzrichin anu leida hashiur shel chiyuva. So that's why we need to know the amount for which you are chayav, because we did some of the references for this. A choleh on Yom Kippur, if possible, we feed them lefi shiurim, right? So, and that means that you feed them less than a kakoteh ben agasa, within the period of time of Kedei Achilat Pras, which we'll talk about in a moment. So, right, Ayin Shin is Ayin Sham. Look there, which is in what do we use? What's the Rashi Tevot we use in English for? So look there. It's not opposite. What do we use?
CF.
No, CF is compare. It's via. It's viz. It's vis. It's to look at. Ayin Sham. CF is to compare to. The Ayin Kaf here means the al kain, but sometimes Ayin Kaf can mean al korchach, right? Perforce. So you have to look each time to see what it means. Okay. Let's continue through. So now in Sif Bet, Kol ha'ochli mitzarfim l'shiur zeh. All manner of food, all things that we eat, join together for this shiur. Afilu melach sha'al habasar v'tzir sha'al yerek, aval achila u'shtiya einan mitzarfot. So this is the psak of something we discussed already when we were learning the Mishnah. Mishnah tells us this, right? That all food is mitzaref zelazeh. So it doesn't matter what you're eating, as long as all together, if you were to eat kekotevet hagasa on Yoma Kippurim, you'll be chayav. What does it mean that all food is mitzaref? Even the salt that's on meat, and even the tzir, the brine that's on a vegetable. Even though, and why? What's the chidush there? Why would I think that it wouldn't be mitzaref?
So the question is, so basically, there's a question about whether this.
Oli?
Go ahead.
And so the question is, I mean, we would think that since this really isn't sort of the ikar, the brine or the salt isn't the ikar of the food, we would think that would not be.
That's true, but od yoter, more than that. What's the chidush here?
It's not food in the sense that it's satisfying. It's not a meal in itself.
A little bit simpler.
This is also something that you would not eat on its own.
So that's the point, right? All ochlim are mitzarfim l'shiur zeh. Anything, all foods, but even salt, which you don't eat separately. You don't eat it as a food, but once I put it together with food, it has the same din as food for this purpose, that it's counted as part of the shiur. That's what he's trying to say. Just so, if you add salt to your meat, and that, you have like a little piece of meat, and you add a little bit of salt, maybe it's that little bit of salt that's going to put it over into the shiur category. And the same thing for the tzir that's on the yerek, even though later on we'll see in the Shulchan Aruch, and we learned already based on the Mishnah, that when you eat those things unto themselves on Yom Kippurim, even if you ate a shear of them, you're not chayav, because they're not ra'ui to eat by themselves. But when I combine them with food, they become part of the shear. Right? So eating and drinking don't join together to make a single shear. So what does the Mishnah Berurah have to say here? Afilu melch v'chulei v'tzir she'al yerek diba'in lahachshir et ha'ochel, because they're there to lahachshir et ha'ochel, in other words, to prepare the food, right? They're part of the food preparation. The kol davar sheba it could mean here to prepare. It could also mean like to finish off, right? It's to make the food fit for eating, right? Literally, they're there to make the food fit for eating. Anything that's there to be machshir the food is considered like food, meaning for this purpose of being counted as part of the shiur. The hey. Anybody know what hey means here?
Hu hadin.
Good, very good. V'hu hadin, right? So it's the same din. It's the same thing. V'hu hadin, b'shara pito b'yayin or b'mayim. If you soaked your bread in wine, or you soaked your bread in water, then mitzaref hayayin o hamayim lahapat. Then the wine or the water, respectively, will become part of the shiur that you have with eating the bread. Right. So those would also be achshure uchla for this purpose. Sif Gimel achal. Now we're getting into a question that Paul asked way back when we were learning the Mishnah. And that was because the Mishnah doesn't talk about it specifically there, but this idea of achilat pras, that you have to eat the food within a certain amount of time. So here the Shulchan Aruch says, achal v'chazar v'achal. You ate and then you went back and ate. In other words, you ate and then you didn't eat for whatever period of time, and then you went back and you ate more. Im yesh mitchilat achila rishana ad sof achila achrona kedei achilat pras mitztarfin. If from the beginning of the first eating that you made, that you did, until the end of the last eating that you did, you have the time of achilat pras, right? We know this is a measure of time, kedei achilat pras, mitztarfin, that all of the eating that you ate will join together to be one shiur, or it will join, and if that's, let's say, kikotevet hagasa, then you're chayav. Unless of that, you're not chayav. The imlav ein mitztarfin, and if not, right, if you didn't eat, if imlav ein mitztarfin, if you let more than kedei achilat pras go from your first eating to the next eating, then those two shiurim, whatever you ate, are not mitztaref. So, and in a moment, he's going to tell us what shiur achilat pras is, in case you're wondering, which you should be, right? Einan mitztarfot. Shimachal pachot, and the Mishnah Berurah here just expands on that. If you ate less than a kakotevet, b'shata gam kein pachot mikashiur. Oh wait, this is from, that was the end of the last one, which I didn't do. That's the idea that achila and shtiyah don't mix, right? That if you ate less than a kakotevet and you drank also less than a shiur, you drank less than a shiur, which we haven't defined yet. Einan mitztarfot b'yachad l'chayvo, right? They're not mitztaref together to make him chayav. Tikim lehu l'chachamim she'en da'atom mityashevet b'kach. The person's mind is not put at ease by eating less than a shiur of food and drinking less than a shiur of whatever drink he's drinking. Okay, achal b'chazar b'achal v'hu hadin imocher b'li hafsek. And this is the same din if he just ate continuously. In other words, right, but rather he's talking about a case where he took whatever food he was eating and he crumbled it into crumbs. In other words, he made it into very small pieces, and then he ate them. Right, so he had, like, he had a cookie and he crumbled it up, and then he would eat like a crumb here and a crumb there and a crumb here and a crumb there, and maybe a chocolate chip along the way. I don't know.
So that's the way the cookie crumbles.
That's exactly the way the cookie crumbles, right? Now we see it has a halachic import. The Ayin Yud Zayin, what does that stand for?
Yayadze.
Say that again.
Yayadze.
Right, or al yedei, right? Al yedei, and by way of this, right? Nishtaheh ba'achilato harbe, by way of this, then the time that he's eating schleps out, right? He ends up the shahot, right, means to wait or to tarry, right? He tarries in his eating for a long time. Gimel Kaf is
Gamken.
Gamkein, very good. Right? Gamkein ba'inan, so we also need Shiyahe mitchilat achilato ad sofo rak kedei achilat pras. So nonetheless, we need this shiur of time, only this amount of time of kedei achilat pras in order for them to be mitztarev. V'im lav, Ritzono Resh Lamed is Ritzono Lamar, right? It can be Ritzoni Lamar if it's the first person, Ritzono Lamar if it's the third person, right? That is to say, or in English we would use the IE for that, I dot E dot. Sheshaha be'achilato yoter mishiur, that if he took the time of eating, if the time that he took for eating went on beyond shiur achilat pras, ein mitzref tchilat achila l'sofa l'chayev karet. Then whatever he ate in the beginning, whatever he ate later, don't join together. So how much is an achilat? How much is kedei achilat pras? So that's Seif Dalet. Shiur achilat pras, yesh omrim arba beitzim, yesh omrim shlosha beitzim. And the Rama puts here in parentheses beitzim sochakot. So there's an idea of shiurim not only related to volumetric, these are volumetric measures, but we also have it by length measures. There's an idea of a shiur and a shiur sochek. A shiur sochek is like the spread out version. So if in the case of, let's say, a tefach, so you can have it, right? So tefach is literally a hand's breadth, right? So you can make a fist and make a hand's breadth, or you could spread your fingers out a little bit and make a hand's breadth. So an amma, let's say amma socheket is an amma that's based on this idea of spreading out the base measure. So an amma socheket is larger than a stam amma. A beitza socheket is large. It would be like sort of like the maximum size of a beitza, and we're using a volumetric measure here, of course, in relation as a basis for the time measure. So achilat pras is a time measure. It's the time it takes to eat 4 beitzim, or some people say it's the time it takes to eat 3 beitzim, and the Rama is adding 3 beitzim sochakot. So it would be like 3 beitzim of maximum measure, which would make it a longer period of time. Right? If the beitzim are effectively larger, it takes longer to eat them. Yesh omrim v'yesh omrim. So the Mishnah Berurah, right, just says, right, some people say 4, some people say 3. That's a machloket rishonim between the Rambam and Rashi and other poskim. L'inyan halacha. So the Shulchan Aruch here doesn't give a clear psak. He says some people say 4 beitzim, some people say 3 beitzim. So what do we do? So the Mishnah Berurah says, "L'inyan halacha kol shehu b'shel Torah helech acharei hamachmir, the kol shehu b'shel divreihem helech acharei hamikir." Right. So if it's involving a shiur midioraita, then will be machmir. So which shiur is the machmir shiur of kedei achilat pras?
For jumbo eggs.
No, Paul is shaking his head. What do you say, Paul? I muted you. Hold on a second. You have to unmute yourself. Anyway, no, it's the 3, right? In other words, here, because what's the chumrah?
Well, the chumrah is the interval of time. So,
It's the
like,
interval of time. So
if you have a longer interval of time, that means you got less food going into you.
if you have a longer
So
interval,
they'd be more.
well, so the thing is this, the thing is this, it depends, it can be either one, could be the chumrah, either one could be the kula, and either one could be the chumrah. It depends what you're measuring. So if you're measuring, put it this way.
If you're measuring an interval of time, then it'd be the larger unit, and if you're measuring an amount, then it'd be the smaller unit.
Right. So here, what I'm saying is, here the truth is we're only measuring an interval of time in this context. So kedei achilat pras is either the time it takes to eat 4 eggs, or it's the time it takes to eat 3 eggs. So the chumrah of the 4 eggs, the 4 egg time, right? The chumrah is that's more time for you to be over on the isur right, for you to be chayav, right? So let's say, just for the purpose of this discussion, let's say kedei achilat pras of 4 beitzim is 9 minutes, and 3 beitzim would be 3/4 of 9 minutes. So let's say it's 10. Let's say the 4 beitzim is 10 minutes, and 3 beitzim would be 7.5 minutes. So if you ate a shiur in 8 minutes, so if you're machmir, you'll go like the shiur that's 4 beitzim to say that you're chayav. If you would be mekil, then you would say it's the 7.5 minutes, and you didn't eat a whole shiur in 7.5 minutes. So that's a tzad chumrah. See what I'm saying? That's the tzad chumrah.
So based standard, then the unit of time effectively is a unit of volume. It's like the amount you could eat in X amount of time.
Well, no, but you know what? It reminds me. It reminds me of the term.
Right now.
It reminds me of the way we think of a light year. What's a light year? What does that measure? It doesn't measure time.
Distance.
It's a measure of distance. But we use time as part of the reference in making the calculation for that length. So here, I guess it's sort of it's a little bit, if it's the reverse, but it's in contrast is what we're saying. So when we talk about the shiur of kedei achilat pras, we need to start with an understanding of what a pras is as a volumetric measure. So then we have this machloket. Is it the equivalent of 4 beitzim, or is it the equivalent of 3 beitzim? So that's one question. So and it's relevant to know for other halachot, a pras equals this much volume of whatever it is you're measuring. But once I know that, then I use that as a basis for determining a time measure. That how long does it take me to eat? How long does it take an average person to eat 3 beitzim versus how much time does it take an average person to eat 4 beitzim? Anyway, sochakot, right? So this was the last little comment from the Ramah. And what does it mean? Kol beitza b'milui u'v'revach u'v'lo b'tzimtzum. It's any egg that's full and expansive, as it were, and not precisely down to the last measure. That's
is this achilat pras something? It's an average time, or it's the time for each person himself?
So this is a good question, which as you see, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say explicitly, but since it doesn't say explicitly, and it's also referenced elsewhere, it's considered to be an average time. It's not, in other words, right? Because we'll see a little bit later on the Siman that the shiur for drinking is specific to each person, but we've already established that the shiur for eating is fixed, no matter how big or small you are. That's in the very first seif, right? That's the way the Shulchan Aruch began, and that's based on the Gemara, and as the Mishnah Berurah explained, because that was a Masorah of the Chachamim. So the reason I'm pointing it out is, in general, in halacha, when shiurim are mentioned like this, it's based on what's considered to be a norm or an average. So kedei achilat pras, but nonetheless, this shiur of kedei achilat pras, exactly how long it is still, even setting aside the question of 3 beitzim or 4 beitzim, it's still not clear. And there, if you can Google this, you can go online and just say kamazeh, kedei achilat pras, and you'll see the references, and some of them we looked at in the Shulchan Aruch. The Aruch HaShulchan is going to say around 7 minutes, but it's kind of a guess. It's like an educated guess.
Did modern poskim fix this in time, in minutes, in seconds?
Absolutely, yes. So there are poskim that will fix it in absolute terms, and other people who, but here when we talk about absolute terms, like in minutes, minutin, right? We'll see. I'll show you in the Aruch HaShulchan. I'll talk about minutin. That's a very modern K'nei Midah, right? It's a modern kind of measuring stick, because until clocks were ubiquitous, that wouldn't necessarily be such a good way to tell somebody how long that time is, right? If you met somebody 500 years ago, and you asked, said kedei achilat pras, and you say 7 minutes, they may know what that means in theory, but there's no real practical way of measuring that. So it all comes back to the whole idea. Why do the Chachamim, why are they koveya using kedei achilat pras? Presumably because that's something that people can know based on experience, right? And even he said before, like it's a kibetza. The Mishnah Berurah says it's like an average size egg. So what's an average size egg? Now nowadays, we could
number 2 or number 3.
Right. So we could take 1,000 eggs. We could do a statistical analysis, and we can come up with a pretty precise measure, right, down to a fraction of a milliliter of that volumetric measure. We could do that, but if when you're in reality, for most of human history, that's not really the way things were done. But people who grew up in an agrarian society where people saw eggs all the time, everybody knows that that's the size of an average egg, and they'll say, "Oh, that's a really big one," or "Oh, that's a really small one," right? And like you say, nowadays we go to the store and we choose them; they're already sorted for us, so we don't think of it in that same way. But if you have chickens in your backyard, you go and gather up the eggs. Some are bigger, some are smaller. And so you get an idea how much these things are. Just a second, I was thinking of something. Oh, it'll come to me. I can't do it. So now he says here in the Shulchan Aruch says in Sifek, Hadiba'in and shiur, right? That which we need a shiur. Hainu the chiyuv karet or chatat. So here the Shulchan Aruch lays it out explicitly. The purpose of mentioning the shiur, in other words, all the last three seifim that I've talked about the shiur, or even 4 seifim that I've talked about the shiur, that's for a chiyuv karet. That is, if you ate that shiur kidei b'chdei achilat pras, the meziv, then you'll be chayav karet. O chatat, you'll be chayav a chatat. But of course, nobody brings a chatat nowadays. Aval isura ika b'chol shu. There's an isur even with the smallest amount. And the Mishnah Berurah already pointed out that for practical reasons, we need to know this for when we need to eat on Yom Kippur. So Hadaba'in and Shiur, the Mishnah Berurah says, Hainu bein li'inyan achila, bein li'inyan shtiyah, that which we need a shiur of time, that or both a shiur of volume for eating and drinking, and also shiur of time for how much time would have to pass before it's mitzdaref or not mitzdaref to shiur. Bein li'inyan achila, bein li'inyan shtiyah, that which we need a shiur, whether for eating or for drinking, as we're going to say later on, for drinking, is for karet and chatat, but isura ika min haTorah. So the Mishnah Berurah adds in the words that there's an isur from the Torah for eating or drinking even the smallest amount, and that's, we know from our extensive discussion of Chatzi Shiur. Seif Vav. Achal ochlim sheinam ru'uyim la'achila. If you ate food that's not fit to eat, o she'achal achila gasa. If you ate literally a fat meal, right? And achila gasa is what? It's this idea that if you eat after you're already full, after you're already sated, and under normal circumstances, no one would eat anymore. If you continue to eat after you no longer even want to eat, that's achila gasa, right? So
even a small dollop.
Even right, you could have. I think we'll have shiurim of Michael, dollop. That's an inside joke. So, question is, how will you ever get to the point of achila gasa on Yom Kippur? Because if you're so stuffed that you can't eat anymore, it means you've already eaten a shiur. So how can you get to a point beyond that on Yom Kippur? So he says, Kigon miyad al achila sha'achal erev Yom Kippurim ad shekatz bimzono patur. Right. So this is all one sentence. If you ate food that's not fit to eat, or if you ate, and I'll just paraphrase this, if you ate after you were already sated on Yom Kippur, after you were already sated on Erev Yom Kippur, right? So you had your Sudam of Seket, you ate right up until Yom Kippur, and you're stuffed. You couldn't eat another thing, as we say, but nonetheless, you stick food in your mouth and you swallow it down, even though it's like the last thing in the world that you want. But that's eating ala achila gasa. Even if you eat food that you would normally want to eat, or food that's normally fit for eating, that now becomes in the same category as eating food that's not at all fit for human consumption. In both of those cases, you're patur. The Torah says you're patur for eating on Yom Kippur, even if you ate a shiur, right? That's the chidush. Haga, the Rama adds, V'im achal ma'achalim mevusamim o metubalim al achilato chayav. But if you ate food that was spiced in some way, on top of the food that you already ate, you're chayav. The Rav Chaliv Sume Shlicha. This is based on a Gemara that we haven't seen yet. But the idea is, if you, as an example, what does it mean like mevusamim utubalim? Like if you had like a piece of cake that you eat afterwards, because people, right? And this is something that we know in our experience. Like, I'm stuffed, I can't eat anything else, but I'll have some dessert. So that's basically what he's saying. If you ate ma'achalim mevusamim utubalim, then you would be chayav, even though you're already stuffed. Yasur b'yom kippur litam davar lahaflit. You're not allowed to taste something on Yom Kippur, even if you're going to spit it out. Afilu atzei b'samim. Even atzei b'samim, like literally, woody spices, like chewing on a piece of cinnamon. Even if you're not going, and even you put the piece of cinnamon in your mouth and you chewed on it and spit it out, you're not allowed to do that on Yom Kippur. And here in the end, he says, Ayin Lamed. What's Ayin Lamed? So you see, it's Ayin Lamed, and then it gives you a reference place. Siman Tav Kuf Samach Zayin. So in this context, Ayin Lamed will mean Ayin. It's either going to be Ayin La'el, look earlier, or because this is an earlier Siman, it's Tav Kuf Samach Zayin. If it's later, then Ayin Lamed means Ayin L'Kaman, look further on. Sif Gimel B'Haga, and the Haga is the Haga of the Ramah, and there the Ramah says that on a regular fast day, you are allowed to do this. You're allowed to chew, let's say, on cinnamon sticks, and then just spit it out. But
what about toothpaste?
So it's actually the same thing. Toothpaste, you presumably on Yom Kippur you can't do anyway, because Rav Moshe held in any event that toothpaste is something you can't use on Shabbos, right? Which is why
Meipe.
right, yeah. So you have like meipe, but on fast days, then you would be allowed, because it would fall into this category of putting something in your mouth, even though you taste it, but you're only putting it there. You're putting it there knowing that you're going to spit it out. So I would also say this is like chewing gum. I think this would also apply to chewing gum. It's the same way. I think before people had chewing gum, I think you get the impression when you're reading Rishonim on this, that this was what people did sometimes just to freshen their mouth. They might chew on a cinnamon stick or some other kind of woody something, or a certain leaves, maybe loyada. I'm not a social historian, but that's what he's talking about. So in this seif, we understand that you're patur from eating if you eat things that are not fit for eating, or if you eat beyond your capacity to eat, right? If you eat so much that it's no longer considered to be a way that you would normally eat. But then the Haggah says, but this doesn't include essentially things that you'll eat for dessert, or things that you would eat like after a meal anyway, and that you're not allowed to chew on things even if you know you're going to be spitting them out. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. Let's just look at the Mishnah Berurah.
I mean, I would assume that there's of eating things, of stuffing yourself silly, of eating when after you're already sated, eating something that's inedible, on other grounds, but not necessarily for the purposes of this.
You got your speech got a little blurred. Yeah, your connection was a little blurred. Can you say that again?
I mean, I would guess that there's an isur of eating beyond your normal capacity, or eating something that's not edible, but just not for this purpose.
Oh, you mean like not on Yom Kippur?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that
At any time.
at any right. So that right. Mishum derech eretz, you're not supposed to eat so much that it's beyond your capacity. And the Rambam holds in Hilchot Deot actually as a matter of the way one should conduct themselves generally is you're never supposed to eat to satiety, right? You're supposed to always eat a little bit less than what you need to be full. The Rambam puts that in Hilchot Deot, and that's there are health implications to that, which are all part of the Rambam's. The Rambam incorporates that into a halachic system. In any event,
what about the medicine or something like that?
medicine
Yeah,
is something else. So medicine is something else, and then it's going to depend, and we'll get to that later on. That'll be in that Siman Tafresh Yudchet. So if you need that medicine, we did this in some of the recent. We saw the basis for this in the Gemara in recent shiurim, that if you need to take medicine on Yom Kippur, then you take medicine on Yom Kippur, right? In terms of shiurim and so forth, that may depend on the medicine, and may depend. And for some people, as I'm sure you know, some people who are maybe told by doctors that they have to eat on Yom Kippur, so then the food itself is like medicine, but then you get into this question of maybe they will just eat lefi shiurim, and now we have a basis for understanding what it means to eat lefi shiurim. It means you eat less than a kotevet hagasa within the span of kedei achilat pras. So we'll talk more about that in detail when we get to that siman. So foods that are not ru'i l'achila, hainu dvarim marim or nivashim, right? Things that are bitter or things that are rotten, ad sheinam ru'uyim mechamad ze l'achila klal, to the point where they're not really fit for eating at all. Dvarim ru'uyim l'achila rak shehen isurim, regarding food that is fit to eat, but they're simply asur. In other words, the Torah forbids us from eating them generally. Kagon, chelev, unevela, utrefa, ve'kafhe gimel. Anybody know kafhe gimel? No? Yes. That's short for, yeah, Michael?
Kohen HaGadol.
In other contexts, Kafhe Gimel is Kohen Gadol, right? But that's what happens. You look at it and think Kohen Gadol, okay, that doesn't make sense in context. So presumably that's not what it means here. In this context, it means Ki Hai Gavna. Ki Hai Gavna, which in modern Hebrew, actually this predates modern Hebrew, even in Rabbinic Hebrew, Ki Hai Gavna was shortened to Kigon. Kigon meaning, right, either for example or in this case, right? So, Kigon, the Ki Hai Gavna, and in this manner, the point of this being, and something that we've discussed before in the shiur, if you eat food that's ra'ui to eat, even if it's treif, you're chayav on Yom Kippur, because it is food that is fit for human consumption, even though the Torah happens to forbid you from eating it. But you're chayav, so you can be chayav both, let's say, for eating chazir, and chayav for eating on Yom Kippur at the same time. Right. If you ate achila gasa al achila she'achal, right? If you ate after you had already stuffed yourself, al achila she'achal, de aleph lamed kaf. No, so aleph lamed kaf is im lav kain. If not for this, right? Dim lav kain. If it's not for this, in other words, if it's not in a case where you had stuffed yourself on Erev Yom Kippur, how would you find it? In other words, how could you ever have a case of eating after you've stuffed yourself on Yom Kippur where this halacha would be relevant? De ayin kaf pei. So ayin kaf pei al kol panim, right? Because nonetheless, chayav the mashiachal tefillah b'isur kodem shiavo lidei achila gasa, right? In other words, al kol panim here means like in any event. In any event, you are already if you say that the achila that you ate after achila gasa on Yom Kippur means that you've already stuffed yourself on Yom Kippur, you were chayav a long time ago. And so the fact that you're patur for eating after your achila gasa is irrelevant because you're already chayav for having eaten. So the only case can be is if you stuffed yourself right before Yom Kippur and then you ate so much after you were already sated. So then it's relevant to say that you're patur, right? Because you ate beheter until that point, and now what you're eating, you're not allowed to do it, but if you eat it, you're patur. Right? Ad shekatz b'mizono, right? That you ate on Erev Yom Kippurim until you were like disgusted from eating your food. Shochel achshav, right? Ad shekatz b'mizono shochel achshav. Your cuts like it's too much for you now. The food that you're eating now on Yom Kippurim. Ulafuke, right? And that's to exclude imeno cuts. But it excludes the case where it's not so disgusting to you to keep eating. You were satisfied until now. You didn't really have a desire to eat. Aleph ayin pei kaf.
אף על פי כן.
ואף על פי כן, הוא מרגיש טעם כשאוכל חייב. Right? So even in the case where you ate on Erev Yom Kippur and you didn't stuff yourself, but you ate to the point where you felt satisfied, that you didn't feel the need to eat anything more. And then you started to eat more on Yom Kippur, even though you didn't have a particular desire to eat. And even though you can appreciate bagish tam, like you taste the food, you can even appreciate the taste of the food that you're eating, but you didn't particularly want to eat it, you'll be chayav, because that's not considered to be eating al achila gasa. Achila gasa is when you really can't stuff another thing into yourself and you do it anyway. But if you just ate to the point where normally you would stop eating and then you ate more on Yom Kippur, then you'll be chayav. And right? No patur, you're exempt. The achila gasa lo shma achila, because eating achila gasa is not considered to be achila. It's not considered to be eating for the purposes of eating on Yom Kippur. The mem. Nikomakom, right? Nonetheless, the chatchila yesh isur b'zeh, right? So even though you're patur, if you had stuffed yourself on Erev Yom Kippur and then you continued eating on Yom Kippur, even though you're patur, but nonetheless, the chatchila, there's an isur here. The kain b'ochlim she'enam ru'yim nachila yeshisur lechatchila midirabanan. You're not midirabanan. You're not allowed to eat food that's not fit for eating, like drinking gasoline, or I don't know, eating glass or something like that. V'afilu b'chatzi shiur mehen gam ken yesh lizaher l'chatchila. Even less than a shiur of food that's not fit to eat, you should be wary of. You should be careful not to l'chatchila to eat.
So the hypothetical case of a sword swallower.
Well, probably not, because usually they take it out afterwards. It's more like the end. It's more like the thing that we ended off with.
Although a sword would be muksa anyway, so it's
What did you say?
a sword is muksa anyway. So
Well, right, yesh lamar. Okay, it's getting late. Let's just read the last couple of things on this sieve. Right, so the Ramah said, right, if you ate these spiced things, or pleasant smelling things or whatever, after your on top of what you ate on Erev Yom Kippur, where you had already stuffed yourself, then you're chayav. The habach, right? So the bach, we know the bach is the Bayit Chadash, it's parish on the tour. Rabach katav machal ad shekat b'mizono afilu bezeh patur. If you ate until you were had too much of your food, even with this, you're patur. Achen be'emet hakol talui lefi ma shehu margish b'nafsho. In other words, ultimately, this really does depend on you personally. So there isn't a specific shiur for this, because each person will know if what they're eating is beyond what their normal, what they would consider to be eating, right? So if you're so stuffed that if you eat one more thing, like you say, if I eat any more, I'll be sick, or something like that. That's each person according to whatever they're feeling. So kaf is ken katav, mem aleph in this context is Magen Avraham, right? This is what the Magen Avraham wrote. The Reish Lamed, this is a common one. What's Reish Lamed? Didn't we have one already?
It's a Romero.
Yeah, it's on Omar, right? And he means to say, de bistam talinan de b'machal mitzubal kishu ochel afilu im haya mitchila sabah b'yoter eino katzba. So you're saying we're talking about a stam case when you're eating this machal mitzubal, this spiced or herbed something that you would eat, that you would normally eat even if you were already extremely sated. Eino katzba, but he won't be disgusted by it. Bazet Mairi Harama, this is what the Ramah is talking about. The Afal Pichein, nonetheless, Imargish benafsho shekoev lo ha'achila v'katzba patur. Nonetheless, if he himself feels that it's that he's disgusted by this eating, he would be patur. In other words, it's not, what he's saying is, even though the Ramah says that if you eat, for the purposes of the discussion, we'll say if you eat like some kind of a spiced dessert, and the Ramah says you'll be chayav, then it still is going to depend on you personally. If you eat beyond your capacity, even if it's dessert and that you really don't have room even for dessert, and you start to get disgusted when you're eating that much, then you would be patur. Okay, essentially that's going to be between you and the Kadosh Baruch Hu, as are all of these things really. And the last part, right? The next last. You're not allowed to taste something in order to spit it out. Afil pachot mikishur, right? Even less than the kishur. Afil im yodeh she'achol la'amod atzmo shelo yivla klum. Even if you trust yourself to not swallow anything. And actually, I think the case of the toothpaste is a good example, because I think we all trust ourselves not to swallow our toothpaste. It could happen sometimes, but let's say 99.9% of the time, we are consciously, even subconsciously, we're not going to swallow that. We don't think of that as something swallowable. And nonetheless, on Yom Kippur, we say, don't even do that. Don't even put anything in your mouth, not to spit it out, right? With the idea that you're going to spit it out. I feel let's say besamim. This is a little bit long, but it's okay. Shuhu eitz ba'alma, right? So this is even though atzei besamim is in fact just a piece of wood. Mikol makom kishelo asom margish tam. When you chew it, you have a taste. It gives you a taste. Aval mutar lahariach. You're allowed to smell. L'malot minyan me'ah brachot, to fill out the me'ah brachot. Right? So every day you're supposed to say 100 brachot, and on Yom Kippur you miss a bunch of them, right? Because you don't wash, you don't make blessing over food, you don't bench, right? So like a typical meal, you already have 7 brachot, right? Because you have to wash. You say hamotzi, and then you have the 4 brachot of Birkat Hamazon, so you're missing all that. So how do you get your me'ah brachot? So one way of doing it is to smell nice things on Yom Kippur. The kol zeh shelo hisich da'atom min lahariach. I'm sorry, I see that Kav Zayin could be kol zeh, here it means kol zman. You get it from context. All the time that he hasn't been distracted his mind from smelling, asur lachzur mevarech dahavi bracha she'no tzarich she'na tzricha. In other words, if you said a bracha and then smelled something nice on Yom Kippur, so you can't do that 100 times in a row, right? So what it means is that if you haven't been mesir dat from that first smell, you can't go back and say the bracha again. יש אנשים שמריחים במים המריחים שקוראים ספירטוס, like spirit, אבל כשאינו מריח אין צריך לברך עליו כלל. So some people, ואין מברכים עליו כלל ועושים איסור. The Aruch HaShulchan will talk about this a little bit more, and it seems that the spirit they're talking about, so spirit, like it could be some kind of an alcohol, not necessarily as a beverage. It seems, from what I understood from the Aruch HaShulchan, which we'll look at another time, this would be something like smelling salts, but in a liquid form. It would be something that you smell just to like wake yourself up. So some people smell this on Yom Kippur, and they don't make a blessing on it at all. They're doing something that's asur. And here in the Shar HaTzion, which is, as I told you, the Shar HaTzion is usually just the reference. Here he says a little bit more. So I read this and I'm not sure exactly what it means. They make a knot in a patula. I'm not sure exactly what this means. They also do another issue because they make a knot in a patula, the shofchina of spiritus. Sounds like they're taking something. I don't know if it's like a cord or if it's a piece of cloth or something that they make into a knot, and then they pour the spirit on it, and that's what they take a whiff of. It's like, like in the movies, like when they chloroform somebody, they pour the chloroform on a cloth and they put it against the person's nose. So that's the only thing they can smell. So I think that what people were doing was they were pouring on some, maybe some kind of a cloth that they had tied into a knot so that it'll capture enough of the liquid. They pour it on and then they smell it. Right? When you make the knot at the end of whatever it is you're making the knot on, that's asur on Yom Kippur because you're not allowed to make a knot on Yom Kippur. That's malacha. Spiritus gam ken hu asur shemolidin boreach. It's also asur to add the spirit, like to pour the spirit on it, because then you're causing like the birth, as it were, of the smell in that thing, which is no allowed. You're not allowed to make, use no allowed on Yom Tov or on Yom Kippur. So I have to do some research to find out what a patula is. The only thing I can tell you is wait, alei kanim, yesh kosim alei kfamim. Right, these are the different. Wait a second. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's already the next one. So we'll leave that for next time. The only thing I can tell you is on Yom Kippur. I think we've all seen this. The people who have the little snuff boxes. So that's the thing. The snuff box on Yom Kippur. Yesh lomar that not only can it help you to stay awake, but there's another thing that you'll say another bracha on Yom Kippur. So there may be some advantage to that. Anyway, okay, so listen, next time let's finish the Mishnah Brura and maybe we'll get into the Aruch HaShulchan, and then we'll be able to compare and contrast the different styles as well as learn different approaches to halacha. So you're all invited to go ahead and read ahead. If you can, make a chavrusa or something to prepare. Anyway, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.